Step away from the counter and keep your hands where I can see them." The voice cut clean through the morning rush, sharp enough to freeze every clink of silverware and every low murmur in the diner, and Ava Johnson felt it before she fully heard it, that shift in the air like pressure dropping before a storm, like something unseen had just walked in and taken control. The bell above the door was still swaying slightly, a faint metallic ring echoing, and two men in dark jackets stood just inside, their eyes already locked on her, not scanning the room, not hesitating, just fixed, deliberate, certain. And for a second Ava didn't move, her hand still hovering over a half-filled coffee mug, steam curling upward in thin, fragile lines that caught the morning light pouring through the front windows, turning everything soft and golden except the tension that now pressed against her chest. She blinked once, slow, steady, the way she had trained herself to do when things didn't make sense, when the world tilted just enough to make you question your footing, and she set the coffee pot down carefully, the glass base touching the counter with a soft, controlled tap, because sudden movements never helped, because calm was the only thing she owned in a place where everything else could be taken. Around her, the diner had gone quiet in that unnatural way, forks paused mid-air, conversations cut short, eyes drifting toward her but never fully committing, like no one wanted to be part of whatever this was, like silence itself was safer, and Ava could feel it, that familiar weight of being seen and unseen at the same time, of standing in the center of something while everyone else stepped back just enough to stay clean. She raised her hand slowly, palms open, not out of fear but out of instinct, out of years of understanding how quickly things could be misunderstood, how quickly a moment could turn into something else entirely. And one of the men took a step forward, his shoes firm against the checkered floor, his expression unreadable, not angry, not kind, just controlled, like he had done this 100 times before. Ava's eyes flickered past him for half a second, just enough to catch the reflection in the window, her own face staring back at her, tired but steady, the same face that had looked at an old man just 12 hours ago and made a choice without thinking about consequences, without calculating cost, just a quiet decision made in the space between one breath and the next. The hum of the refrigerator behind the counter suddenly felt louder, the scent of bacon and toast hung heavy in the air. Grounding, familiar, normal, everything this moment wasn't, and Ava swallowed once, her throat dry despite the steam and warmth around her, her mind already racing ahead, trying to connect something that refused to connect, trying to understand why two federal agents would walk into a small-town diner at 8:17 in the morning and look at her like she was the answer to a question she didn't even know had been asked. "Ava Johnson," the second man said, his voice lower, measured, and she nodded once, just once, because denying her name had never changed anything. And somewhere behind her, a chair scraped softly against the floor as someone shifted, the smallest sound in a room that had forgotten how to breathe. And in that suspended second, Ava realized something without knowing how she knew it, that whatever had started the night before, whatever quiet act she thought had ended when she wiped down the counter and stepped out into the cool air, hadn't ended at all. It had followed her, it had waited, and now it was standing right in front of her, wearing a badge and asking her to step away. The question hung in the air for a fraction longer than it should have, not because she did not hear it, but because something inside Ava resisted answering too quickly, as if speed alone could make her look guilty of something she still did not understand, and she let that half-second stretch just enough to feel the weight of every eye in the diner before she spoke, her voice steady, quiet. "Yes, that is me," and the first agent nodded once, a small motion, controlled, like he had already expected that answer, like this was not a search but a confirmation, and he reached into his jacket slowly, deliberately, pulling out a leather badge holder and flipping it open just enough for her to see the gold crest catch the light. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," the words sitting heavy in her chest even before he said them out loud, and the room shifted again, not louder, not chaotic, just tighter, like the air itself had narrowed. Ava lowered her hands slightly but kept them visible, her fingers relaxed, palms still open, because she knew better than to break the rhythm of a moment like this. And the second agent stepped closer to the counter, stopping just short of crossing that invisible line where customers stood and workers stayed, his gaze moving briefly over the coffee pot, the order slips, the small stack of unpaid checks clipped near the register, then back to her face as if measuring something that could not be written down. "We just need to ask you a few questions," he said, his tone even, almost polite, but not soft, never soft, and Ava nodded again, slower this time, her mind already moving backward. retracing hours instead of seconds, searching for something that could explain why she was standing here with federal agents asking about her morning. The bell above the door creaked faintly as someone shifted it by accident, but no one left, no one dared, and somewhere behind her the cook turned the heat down on the grill, the hiss of oil fading into a low whisper, the only sound brave enough to continue. Ava glanced once toward the far corner booth, empty now, but still holding the shape of a memory from the night before, a thin man with shaking hands, a coat too light for the cold, eyes that did not quite meet hers at first, and the way he had hesitated before sitting, like he was not sure he was allowed to take up space, and her chest tightened slightly as the image sharpened, not fear exactly, but recognition, like a puzzle piece finally turning the right way. "Did you work the late shift last night?" the first agent asked, and she nodded, yes. Until about 10:30, her voice quieter now, more inward, as if she was already stepping back into that night, into the soft hum of the closing hours, the dimmed lights, the half-wiped tables, the world shrinking down to just a few remaining customers and the slow rhythm of finishing what needed to be done. The second agent exchanged a quick glance with the first, something silent passing between them, something practiced, and then he leaned slightly forward, resting his fingertips lightly on the counter, not threatening, just present. "Do you remember serving an older man, mid-70s, grey hair, wearing a brown coat?" And Ava's breath caught just enough to notice, not a gasp, not a reaction anyone else could see, but inside it shifted everything, because now it was no longer a question without shape. It was a moment she knew, a face she had seen, a choice she had made without thinking about who might be watching or what it might mean later, and she could feel the echo of it in her hands, the warmth of the plate she had set down, the quiet way she had said, "You can sit, it is okay," and she nodded once more, slower, more certain. "Yes, I remember him," and the diner, still frozen in its careful silence, seemed to lean in just a little closer, as if the truth itself had just stepped into the room. The word settled heavier than the badge had, because memory was not something she could deflect or delay, and Ava felt the night return to her in fragments first, not as a full scene but as small, precise details, the kind that stayed when everything else faded, the faint rattle of the front door as the wind pushed against it, the clock above the register reading 9:52, the smell of burnt coffee lingering longer than it should have, and him sitting alone in that corner booth like he had been placed there by accident, shoulders slightly hunched, hands wrapped around nothing at all, just resting on the table as if he was waiting for permission to move. She swallowed once, her eyes drifting past the agents again, not to avoid them but to hold on to that memory long enough to answer truthfully, because truth required more than words, it required precision, and she spoke slowly, choosing each piece carefully. "He came in late, almost closing time." He did not say much at first, and the first agent nodded, encouraging without interrupting, while the second remained still, watching her the way someone watches a clock when timing matters. Ava's fingers brushed lightly against the edge of the counter, grounding herself in the present even as her mind stepped fully into the past, and she continued, "He looked tired, not just physically, but like he had been carrying something for a long time," the sentence trailing just enough to reveal that what she had seen went beyond appearance, that she had noticed something others might have ignored. And that seemed to matter, because the agents exchanged another brief glance, quicker this time, sharper. The hum of the diner returned in faint pieces, a cup being set down somewhere, a chair shifting, but it all stayed distant, like the room had decided to give this moment its own space, and Ava felt the weight of that attention press gently against her back, not hostile, just present, unavoidable. "Did he order anything?" the second agent asked, and the question landed softer than the others, but it carried something underneath it. Something that made Ava's chest tighten again, because this was where the memory changed, where it stopped being routine and became something else, something that now stood in front of her in the shape of two men with badges. She exhaled quietly, not a sigh, just a release of air she had not realized she was holding, and shook her head once. No, he checked his pockets, like he was looking for money, but he did not have enough, and for a second, just one, she hesitated, not because she did not know what came next, but because saying it out loud would make it real in a different way, would connect that quiet moment to whatever this had become. The first agent leaned in slightly, not aggressive, just attentive. "And what did you do then?" he asked, and Ava's gaze dropped briefly to the counter, to the faint ring left by a coffee mug, to the small, ordinary details that had felt so normal at the time, and she answered, her voice steady but softer now, "I told him it was okay. I brought him food anyway. And the words hung there, simple, unadorned, but heavier than anything else she had said, because they were not just an action, they were a choice, one made without witness or expectation, one that now seemed to echo far beyond that quiet booth. The second agent straightened slightly, his expression unchanged but his posture shifting just enough to signal that something had aligned, and he asked, "Did he say anything to you after that?" And Ava nodded again, slower, her memory sharpening further, pulling her deeper into that moment. "He thanked me, more than once, but it was not just that." She paused, searching for the exact shape of it, the way his voice had sounded, the way his eyes had held hers for a second longer than expected. He said, "I did not know what I had just done," and the diner, still wrapped in its careful silence, seemed to absorb that sentence differently, as if it carried meaning that had only now begun to unfold. And Ava lifted her eyes back to the agents, a quiet realization forming behind them, that whatever she had done, whatever she thought had ended with a simple act of kindness, had never really been small at all. The sentence did not fade the way normal words did, it stayed, suspended somewhere between Ava and the two agents, as if it had been waiting all night to be heard by someone else, and she could feel it now, the quiet gravity of it pulling everything into focus, the memory sharpening not just in detail but in meaning, and she drew in a slow breath, steadying herself as she continued, because this part mattered, this part was the reason they were here. "He did not eat right away," she said, her voice calm but more certain now. "He just looked at the plate like he was trying to remember something, like it had been a long time since anyone had put food in front of him without asking for something in return." And the first agent's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, not softer, not exactly, but more attentive, like a piece of a larger picture had just slid into place. Ava's fingers rested lightly against the counter, the cool surface grounding her as the diner seemed to lean even further into the silence, every small sound now amplified, the ticking of the wall clock, the distant hum of a passing car outside, the faint scrape of a fork somewhere behind her that quickly stopped as if even that was too loud for this moment. He kept looking over his shoulder, she added, her eyes narrowing slightly as she reached for the exact memory, not in a way that made a scene, just careful, like he was making sure no one followed him in, and that detail landed differently, she could tell, because the second agent straightened just enough to signal recognition, his gaze sharpening in a way that no longer felt observational but confirmatory. Ava continued, her voice steady, the rhythm of her words matching the slow, deliberate pace of her recollection. "When I brought him the food, he asked me what time we closed, and I told him 10, but he stayed even after that, just sitting there, finishing slowly, like he was buying time without actually having anything to spend." And the first agent glanced briefly toward the door, then back to her, as if measuring distance, timing, something unseen but understood. Ava exhaled quietly, the memory now fully formed in her mind, no longer fragments but a continuous thread, and she followed it carefully. When he finally stood up, he thanked me again, and he reached into his coat like he wanted to leave something, but he did not. He just paused, looked at me, and said that line. Her voice softened slightly as she repeated it in her mind, not out loud this time, because it no longer needed repeating, it was already there, already understood. The second agent spoke then, his tone more focused, less general. "Did he leave alone?" And Ava nodded. Without hesitation, yes. He walked out slowly, kept his head down, and I watched him cross the parking lot, her eyes flicking toward the front window as if she could still see it, the dim glow of the streetlight, the long shadows stretching across cracked asphalt. There was a car parked at the far end, engine running, but I could not see who was inside, and that detail shifted the air again, sharper this time, more defined, because now the moment had edges, had movement beyond the diner walls. The first agent's jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but in concentration, and he asked, "Did he get into that car?" And Ava shook her head slowly. "No." He kept walking past it, like he did not trust it, like he was avoiding it, and the silence that followed was different now, no longer uncertain but charged, like something important had just been confirmed without being said directly. Ava lifted her eyes to meet theirs again, her posture still composed, her voice quiet but unwavering. "That is the last time I saw him," and for the first time since they had walked in, there was a pause from the agents, not a gap in questioning, but a moment of calculation, of silent communication between them, and Ava could feel it, that subtle shift from gathering information to understanding it, and somewhere deep inside, beneath the calm she held onto so carefully, a realization began to take shape, that whatever she had stepped into the night before had been far larger than a late shift and a quiet act of kindness, and that this moment, standing here with them, was not the beginning of something, but the continuation of something that had already been set in motion long before she ever poured that cup of coffee. The silence did not break immediately after her last words. It stretched, thin and tight, like something held between 2 points that could snap or settle depending on what came next, and Ava felt it in the way the agents did not rush to fill it, in the way they stood still, letting her account settle into the space around them, and then the first agent nodded slowly, almost to himself, before reaching into his jacket again. This time pulling out a small notepad, flipping it open with a practice motion that felt less like routine and more like confirmation. "You said there was a car," he repeated, not questioning, just anchoring the detail, and Ava nodded once, her posture unchanged, her voice steady. "Yes, parked near the far end of the lot, engine running," but he did not go near it, and the second agent exhaled quietly, not relief, not tension, something in between. Like a piece of a larger pattern had just aligned exactly where it needed to. Behind Ava, a chair shifted. Again, louder this time, followed by a low voice that did not quite whisper, "What is going on?" and the manager stepped forward from behind the register, his presence cutting into the scene with a different kind of tension, one that was less controlled, more defensive, his eyes moving quickly between Ava and the agents, his tone edged with irritation masked as authority. "Is there a problem here, officers?" he asked, though the badge had already answered that question. The first agent turned slightly toward him, not fully, just enough to acknowledge him without giving up focus. "We are speaking with Miss Johnson," he said, calm, even. And the manager's gaze flicked back to Ava, lingering there a fraction too long, like he was trying to reconcile something he thought he knew with something he clearly did not. Ava did not move, did not look away. She had learned long ago that stillness could hold more power than reaction, and she kept her hands resting lightly against the counter, her breathing measured, her presence quiet but unshaken. "She works here," the manager added, his voice tightening slightly. "If there is an issue, I should be aware of it." And the second agent's eyes met his fully now, not aggressive, but firm in a way that made the boundary clear without needing to be stated. "We are aware of her employment," he replied, and that was all. No explanation, no expansion, just enough to close the door on further interference. The manager hesitated, his jaw tightening, the weight of the room pressing against him now as much as it had pressed against Ava earlier, and he stepped back half a pace. Not retreating entirely, but no longer. Inserting himself into the center of the moment, Ava felt the shift immediately, the way control returned to where it had been, and the first agent looked back at her, his expression unchanged but his tone slightly different now, more direct, more precise. "Miss Johnson, based on what you have told us, you may have been the last person to interact with that individual before he moved locations," and the words settled carefully, each one deliberate, each one carrying more weight than the last. And Ava felt it fully now, the transition from uncertainty to significance, from a simple recounting to something that mattered beyond this room. She nodded once, slowly, not out of agreement but acknowledgment, because she understood what he was saying without needing it spelled out further, and the second agent continued, his voice low but clear. "The man you served is part of an active federal matter," and that was the first time the room reacted visibly, a soft intake of breath from somewhere near the door, a cup placed down a little too quickly, the quiet ripple of realization moving outward from the counter. Ava did not react the same way. Her expression remained composed, but inside something shifted. Not fear, not pride, something deeper, something closer to understanding, and she held on to that stillness as the first agent added, "Your actions last night may have directly affected his ability to reach a secure point," and the sentence did not need elaboration, it did not need explanation, it simply existed, heavy and undeniable. And Ava lowered her gaze for a brief moment, not in doubt, but in reflection. Because she could see it now, the thread connecting everything, the quiet decision. The careful way he had looked over his shoulder, the car he avoided, the words he left behind, and she lifted her eyes again, meeting theirs with a calm that had not changed, even if everything around her had, understanding now that what she had done had not been small, had not been invisible, and that this moment, standing here in a diner that suddenly felt much larger than it had an hour ago, was the proof of it. The words did not echo loudly, they settled instead, like dust in sunlight, quiet but impossible to ignore, and Ava felt the shift not in the room first, but inside herself, a subtle release of tension she had been holding since the moment the agents walked in, because now there was shape to it, now there was meaning, and meaning, even when heavy, was easier to carry than uncertainty. She lowered her hands slowly, not abruptly, just enough to rest them lightly against the edge of the counter. her fingertips brushing against the smooth surface as if reminding herself that she was still here, still grounded, still the same person who had poured coffee and cleared plates less than an hour ago. The first agent closed his notepad with a soft, deliberate motion, the sound small but final, like a door gently shutting, and for a moment no one spoke, not the agents, not the manager, not the customers who had now become silent witnesses to something they did not fully understand but could not look away from. Ava's gaze drifted, not far, just to the window where morning light had grown brighter, stretching across the tiled floor in long, pale lines, and she watched the dust move in that light, slow and steady, carried by air no one could see, and it reminded her of the night before, of how quiet things could move, how unseen moments could carry weight long after they passed. The second agent shifted his stance slightly, less rigid now, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a different tone, not authority alone, but something closer to acknowledgment. "You made a decision last night without knowing who he was," he said, and Ava nodded once, her eyes still calm, because that was true, that was the only truth she had, and she did not need to add anything to it. The manager cleared his throat behind her, the sound hesitant now, stripped of its earlier edge, and Ava could feel his attention on her in a way it had never been before, not dismissive, not impatient, but uncertain, like he was seeing something he had not noticed until now. The hum of the diner slowly returned, not fully, not like before, but in fragments, a spoon tapping lightly against ceramic, a quiet cough from the far table, the soft slide of a menu being adjusted, life inching back into motion around a moment that still held its center. Ava took a slow breath, steady and even, and for the first time since the agents arrived, her shoulders lowered just slightly, the invisible weight easing without disappearing entirely, and she looked at them again, both of them, her expression unchanged but her understanding deeper, clearer. She did not ask what would happen next, she did not ask what it meant for her, because something in the way they stood, in the way they had spoken, told her that this was not about consequence for her. It was about consequence of something larger, something already in motion long before she stepped into it. Outside, a car passed, its tires whispering against the road, and the sound felt distant, almost unreal, compared to the quiet clarity settling inside her, and she realized then that the moment from last night, the simple act of placing a plate in front of someone who needed it, had not changed her. She was still who she had always been, but it had revealed something else, something others were only now beginning to see. The first agent gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, and stepped back half a pace, not leaving, just shifting the space, and Ava remained where she was, her hands resting lightly, her posture steady, her gaze soft but unwavering, as the light continued to move across the floor, marking time in a way that felt both ordinary and quietly significant. And in that stillness, without words, without declaration, something settled into place, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a kind of quiet certainty that did not need to be spoken to be understood. The quiet did not break with noise, it shifted with understanding, and Ava felt it in the way the agents no longer looked at her like a question, but like an answer they had been searching for, something confirmed rather than suspected. And the second agent reached into his jacket once more, not hurried, not dramatic, just deliberate, and pulled out a thin envelope, worn slightly at the edges, the kind of object that had been carried longer than expected, and he placed it gently on the counter between them, not sliding it, not pushing it forward, just setting it there like it belonged. Ava's eyes dropped to it, her reflection faintly visible on its surface under the diner lights, and for a moment she did not touch it, not because she was afraid, but because she understood that whatever was inside had already changed something before she even opened it. The first agent spoke quietly, his tone steady. "He left that with a field contact early this morning," he said, and Ava looked up, her gaze meeting his again, searching not for permission but for clarity, and he gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, enough to tell her that it was meant for her, that this moment had been intended long before she realized it. Her fingers moved then, slow, careful, the envelope light in her hand, the paper soft from use, and she opened it with a steady motion, the sound barely audible but sharp in the stillness, and inside was a folded piece of paper, simple, unmarked, no official seal, no signature visible from the outside, just something personal, something that did not belong to systems or titles. She unfolded it, the crease holding memory of the hands that had made it, and her eyes moved across the lines, reading silently, her expression unchanged at first, but something behind her gaze shifted, deepened, and the room seemed to lean closer without moving, every presence drawn toward the quiet gravity of that moment. The words were not long, not elaborate, but they carried weight in their simplicity, a message written by someone who had no guarantee of being heard, only hope, and Ava read them once, then again, slower, letting each word settle fully, and when she reached the end, her hand lowered slightly, the paper still held between her fingers, her breathing steady but deeper now, like she had stepped into something she could not step out of. The second agent watched her carefully, not intruding, not asking, just giving space for the moment to complete itself, and after a second, he spoke, his voice quieter than before. He knew he might not get another chance to say it, and Ava nodded once, her eyes still on the paper, because she understood that now. She understood why the man had looked at her the way he did. Why his words had carried something more than gratitude. Behind her, the manager shifted again, but this time there was no interruption, no attempt to insert himself into what he could not control, only silence, respectful now, uncertain, but no longer dismissive. Ava folded the paper carefully, not rushing, aligning the edges as they had been before, and placed it back into the envelope, her movements precise, almost reverent, and she set it down on the counter where it had been, her hand resting beside it for a moment longer before she pulled back. She lifted her gaze to the agent again, her posture unchanged, her voice quiet but certain. He was not just passing through, was he? She said, not as a question that needed answering, but as a realization spoken aloud, and the first agent held her gaze for a brief second before responding, no, he was not, and that was enough, more than enough, because everything else had already been said without words. The light from the window had shifted again, brighter now, touching the edge of the envelope, illuminating it in a way that made it stand out against the worn surface of the counter, and Ava looked at it once more, not with confusion, not with hesitation, but with a quiet understanding that what she had done the night before had not only helped someone survive a moment, it had carried something forward, something that now rested in front of her, tangible and undeniable, and in that stillness, without announcement, without spectacle, the truth settled fully into place. The envelope remained where she had placed it, but it no longer felt like an object that belonged to the counter. It felt like something that had already done its work simply by being read, and Ava's hand rested a few inches away from it, not touching, not reaching, just acknowledging its presence the way one acknowledges something important without needing to hold it again. The second agent exhaled slowly, the first visible sign that whatever they had come here to confirm had now been completed, and he straightened slightly, his posture less rigid than before, as if the weight he carried had shifted somewhere else, somewhere beyond this room. He is safe now, he said quietly, not as a reassurance but as a fact, and Ava nodded once, her eyes steady, because she understood what that meant without needing further detail. That whatever road the man had been walking the night before had reached a point where he no longer had to look over his shoulder, where the careful, measured steps she remembered had finally led somewhere secure. The manager behind her shifted again, but this time there was no tension in it, only hesitation, and when he spoke, his voice lacked the sharpness it had carried earlier. Ava, I did not realize, he began, the sentence trailing as if he did not know how to finish it, as if the words he might have used before no longer fit the moment in front of him. Ava did not turn immediately. She let the silence hold for a second, then slowly glanced over her shoulder, meeting his eyes briefly, not with accusation, not with expectation, just with a calm that left no space for what had been said before, and he looked away first, his gaze dropping to the counter, to the small details he had overlooked for so long. The first agent took a step back then, creating space where there had been tension, and the movement signaled something subtle but clear, that their role here was ending, that the moment no longer belonged to procedure but to something quieter, something human. The diner began to breathe again, not all at once, but in small, careful ways, a chair pulling out, a low conversation restarting, the soft clink of a cup being lifted, life returning not as it was before, but slightly altered, as if everyone present had witnessed something they could not fully explain but would not forget. Ava turned back to the counter, her fingers brushing lightly against its surface again, grounding herself in the familiar texture, the everyday reality that still existed beneath everything that had just unfolded, and she picked up the coffee pot, her movement unhurried, her posture unchanged, because this was still her place, still her work, still her life. The second agent paused near the door, his hand resting briefly against the frame, and he looked back once. Not with authority, not with distance, but with a quiet respect that did not need to be spoken, and Ava met that look for a fraction of a second before returning to the simple task in front of her, pouring coffee into a waiting cup, the dark liquid rising steadily, steam curling upward in soft lines that caught the morning light. the envelope remained where it was, untouched now, but no longer overlooked, and the light from the window shifted again, brighter, warmer, settling across the counter and the worn edges of the paper, illuminating it without drawing attention, just existing alongside it, the way truth often does after it has been revealed. Ava set the coffee pot down gently, the soft tap echoing in the now living room, and for a moment she stood still, not thinking about what had happened, not trying to hold on to it or push it away, just standing in the quiet space where everything had settled, where understanding did not need explanation. And as the door opened and closed behind the agents, the faint ring of the bell returned, simple and ordinary, marking not an ending, but a continuation that felt, somehow, different. The bell above the door had already settled back into stillness, but its echo seemed to linger somewhere just beneath the surface of the room, blending with the quiet rhythm of a diner returning to itself. And Ava stood behind the counter with the coffee pot still warm in her hand, watching as sunlight stretched further across the floor, softening the edges of everything it touched, turning worn tiles into something almost reflective, almost calm. She poured another cup without being asked, the motion automatic, practiced, her wrist steady, the dark stream filling the ceramic mug with a gentle rise, steam lifting into the light like something alive but fleeting, and she slid it across the counter toward a customer who now looked at her differently, not in a way that demanded attention, not in a way that needed words, just a pause, a moment longer than usual, as if recognition had quietly replaced assumption. Behind her, the manager moved more carefully than before, his steps measured, his voice lower when he spoke to the cook, the sharpness gone, replaced by something uncertain, something adjusting. And once, just once, Ava caught him glancing at the envelope still resting near the register, his eyes lingering there before shifting away, like he understood it was not his to question. Ava reached for a cloth and wiped the counter in slow, even strokes, the motion grounding, familiar, the scent of clean soap rising faintly, mixing with coffee and toast and the warmth of a morning that had not stopped. Even when everything else had paused, her gaze drifted to the window again, where the parking lot sat quiet under the growing light, empty now except for a few scattered cars, no trace of the one she had seen the night before, no sign of the man who had walked past it, just space, open and still, holding no evidence of what had passed through it hours earlier. And yet she knew it had happened, not because of what others had said, but because she had been there, because she had made a choice when no one was watching. She picked up the envelope then, not with urgency, not with hesitation, just with a quiet intention, and moved it slightly to the side, away from the edge of the counter, placing it where it would not be disturbed. Not hidden, not displayed, just kept. And her fingers lingered on it for a brief second before she pulled back, the paper warm now from her touch. The diner settled fully into motion, voices returning in low tones, forks tapping lightly, the small, ordinary sounds of a place that had witnessed something and then allowed it to pass through, unchanged on the surface but altered somewhere deeper. And Ava moved within it the same way she always had, steady, attentive, present, her posture relaxed but certain, her eyes soft but aware. A child laughed softly near the door, a sound bright and unexpected, and it cut through the room in a way that felt clean, uncomplicated. And Ava glanced over for just a second, a small smile touching her lips before fading back into her usual calm. She reached for the coffee pot again,